It happened to me. Don't ever trust a maid who knows your name before you tell her. I'm Edward Langston, a 29-year-old entrepreneur from London, and last summer, I flew to New York for a business deal that could have changed my life. My friend Marcus offered his empty brownstone in Brooklyn. He was off doing fieldwork in Africa for months, so I had the place to myself. I arrived on a muggy July evening, the air thick with humidity, and let myself in with the key Marcus had mailed me. The house was old, with creaky floors and a faint smell of dust, but I was relieved to have a quiet space after the chaos of travel. That first night, I settled into the guest room on the second floor, unpacking my suitcase and trying to shake off the jet lag. I fell asleep quickly, but my dreams turned dark. Shadows stretched across the walls, whispering my name in a voice I didn't recognize. I saw a woman with hollow eyes standing at the foot of my bed, her lips moving silently, and I woke with a start, my heart racing, the morning sun streaming through the window. I brushed it off as exhaustion, but then I heard the front door creak open downstairs. I froze, grabbing my phone to call for help, when a woman's voice called up, soft and melodic. "Mr. Langston, I'm here to clean." I stepped into the hallway, peering down the stairs, and there she was, a young woman with long auburn hair and pale skin, dressed in a simple gray uniform. "I'm Margaret," she said, smiling up at me, her green eyes catching the light in a way that made my breath catch. "Marcus hired me to come daily, open windows, tidy up." Her voice was warm, soothing, and I relaxed, feeling foolish for my panic. She moved through the house with quiet efficiency, humming a tune I couldn't place, and I found myself watching her more than I should have. There was something magnetic about her, the way she glided across the room, the way her fingers brushed the curtains as she opened the windows, letting in the sticky summer air. That night, the nightmares came back, darker than before. I dreamed of Margaret, her face pale and hollow, her eyes black as coal, whispering my name as she reached for me with bony hands. I woke drenched in sweat, the echo of her voice still in my ears, and I swore I heard the floorboards creak outside my room. When Margaret arrived the next morning, I watched her closely, searching for any sign of the woman from my dream. But she was all smiles, her eyes bright and green, her voice warm as she asked if I needed anything. I shook off the unease, telling myself it was just a nightmare, but I couldn't ignore how her presence made my skin tingle with a strange mix of fear and fascination. Over the next 2 days, Margaret and I grew closer, too close. She'd linger after cleaning, bringing me coffee while I worked on my laptop in the living room, her fingers brushing mine as she handed me the mug. We'd talk for hours, her laughter filling the house, and I found myself drawn to her in a way I couldn't explain. She told me stories of Brooklyn, of the brownstone's history, her voice weaving a spell that made the hours slip away. Oh no. The third day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in a warm orange glow, she sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting on my knee. "You're lonely, Edward," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. "But I can fix that." I turned to her, our faces inches apart, her green eyes locking onto mine, and before I could stop myself, I kissed her, a kiss that felt like fire, consuming every thought I had. Her hands tangled in my hair, her lips soft but urgent, and for a moment, I forgot the nightmares, the unease, everything but her. But as I pulled back, I saw a flicker in her eyes, a glint of red like embers in a dying fire, and a chill ran down my spine. She smiled, but it wasn't warm anymore. It was sharp, predatory, and I knew something was terribly wrong. That night, everything changed. I woke to the sound of locks clicking shut, every door in the house slamming closed one by one. I stumbled out of bed, my pulse racing, and found Margaret standing in the hallway, her eyes no longer green, but a burning red glowing in the dark like twin flames. "You're mine now, Edward," she hissed, her voice no longer melodic but cold and hollow. "And on the next full moon, we'll leave this world together." I tried to run to the front door, but it wouldn't budge, the handle ice cold under my grip, and Margaret laughed, a sound that echoed through the house like breaking glass. She stepped forward, her body passing through the wall like smoke, and I staggered back, realizing with a sinking dread that she wasn't human. "I've waited for you," she said, her red eyes boring into mine. Just as I waited for Marcus, I tried the windows, but they were sealed tight, the glass fogging with my breath as I pounded on them. Margaret followed me from room to room, her laughter growing louder, her form flickering like a dying flame. She told me she was preparing a place for us in another world, her voice dripping with a twisted love that made my stomach churn. For 3 days, she kept me trapped, a prisoner in that cursed house. She'd pace the halls, her red eyes following me, whispering about the new home she was readying for us, her words laced with a chilling promise of eternity. Every day, she'd disappear for a few hours saying she had to make things perfect, and I used that time to search for a way out. The doors were locked, the windows sealed like iron, and every night the nightmares grew worse. Visions of Margaret dragging me into a void, her laughter echoing as I fell into darkness. On the 4th day, while Margaret was gone, I found a trapdoor in the basement hidden behind a stack of dusty boxes. It led to a crawl space with a small, grimy window, just big enough to squeeze through. My hands shook as I pried it open. The glass smudged with years of neglect, and I crawled out into the backyard, the humid air hitting me like a wave. I ran without looking back, my bare feet pounding the pavement until I reached a gas station, 2 miles away. I called a cab and got out of Brooklyn that day, never returning to that house. When I finally reached Marcus by phone a week later, I told him everything. The nightmares, Margaret, the red eyes, the locked doors, the way she passed through walls. His voice went quiet, and then he said, "That sounds like Sophie." He explained that Sophie had been his housekeeper 2 years ago, a young woman with auburn hair and green eyes who'd become obsessed with him. She'd confessed her love, and when he rejected her, she tried to kill him, chasing him through the house with a knife. In the struggle, she fell down the stairs, breaking her neck on the hardwood floor below. She died right there, Marcus said, his voice trembling, in that house. I haven't gone back to Brooklyn since, but I can't shake the feeling that Sophie's still out there, waiting. Some nights I hear a faint humming, the same tune she sang while cleaning, and I wake to find my bedroom door slightly ajar. I don't know if I'll ever be free of her, but I pray she finds someone else to haunt before she comes for me again. It happened to me. Don't ever use a camera you find in a thrift store basement. I'm Thomas Reed, a 34-year-old photographer from Asheville, North Carolina, and last fall, I stumbled into a nightmare that still haunts me. I'd always loved hunting for vintage gear at thrift stores, old lenses, tripods, anything that could give my photos a unique edge. One Saturday in October, I was digging through the cluttered basement of a shop on Patton Avenue when I found it, a beat-up Polaroid, SX70, its leather case cracked and faded, tucked behind a pile of moldy books. The price tag said $10, a steal, so I bought it without a second thought. That night, I set up the camera in my studio apartment on the edge of town, a small space filled with prints and equipment. I loaded a fresh pack of film I had lying around, eager to test the Polaroid's lens. The first shot was simple, a still life of my desk, with a lamp and some notebooks. The shutter clicked, and the photo slid out. But as it developed, I froze. In the corner of the frame where nothing should have been was a shadow, a faint, human-shaped blur with glowing red eyes staring straight at me. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but those eyes didn't fade. I took another photo, this time of my living room window, the curtains drawn against the darkening sky. The shutter snapped, and the photo emerged, revealing the same shadow again, but closer now. Its red eyes brighter, its form more defined, a woman with long, tangled hair and a twisted smile. My hands shook as I dropped the photo, my breath catching in my throat. I checked the room. Nothing was there, just the faint hum of the radiator and the distant sound of traffic outside. I told myself it was a defect in the film, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next morning, I tried to return the camera to the thrift store, but the shop was closed. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Out of business." I drove back home, the camera sitting on the passenger seat like a coiled snake, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. That night, I couldn't resist. I took another photo, this time of my bedroom mirror. The photo developed, and there she was, the woman from the shadow standing right behind my reflection. Her red eyes locked on me, her mouth stretched into a scream. I spun around, but the room was empty, the air suddenly ice cold. Panic set in, and I threw the camera into a drawer, hoping that would stop whatever was happening, but it didn't. That night, I woke to the sound of the shutter clicking on its own, the camera somehow back on my bedside table, a fresh photo sliding out. I grabbed it, my hands trembling, and saw myself sleeping in bed, the woman standing over me, her red eyes glowing brighter than ever, her hand reaching for my throat. I screamed, throwing the camera across the room, but the clicking didn't stop. Photo after photo slid out, each one showing her closer, her fingers inches from my neck. I ran to the bathroom, locking the door behind me, but the clicking followed, echoing through the apartment like a heartbeat. The photos slipped under the door one by one, each showing her face clearer, her skin gray and cracked, her mouth a gaping void, her red eyes burning with rage. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but the screen flickered, showing her face instead, her voice hissing through the speaker. "You can't escape me, Thomas." I dropped the phone, my chest tight with terror, and I heard the bathroom door creak open behind me. I turned, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her red eyes blazing, her twisted smile stretching wider than humanly possible. "I see you," she whispered, her voice a low growl, and she lunged at me, her bony hands outstretched. I dodged, stumbling into the living room, and grabbed the camera from the floor, my hands slick with sweat. I didn't know what else to do. I snapped a photo of her, the flash blinding me for a moment, and she screamed, a sound like shattering glass, her form dissolving into smoke as the photo slid out. The photo was blank, no trace of her, just an empty frame, and the air in the apartment warmed, the clicking finally stopping. I smashed the camera with a hammer that night, breaking it into pieces, and burned the photos in the kitchen sink, the flames turning them to ash. I thought it was over, but I was wrong. A week later, I found a new Polaroid photo on my doorstep. No camera, no explanation, just a single image of me standing in my new apartment in Charlotte, her red eyes glowing. In the background, her twisted smile clearer than ever. I moved out of Asheville the next day, leaving everything behind, but I can't escape her. Every time I look in a mirror, I see a flicker of red in my own reflection, and I hear the faint click of a shutter in the distance. I don't know who she was, but I learned the hard way what that camera held, a curse that captures more than just images. So here's my warning. Never use that camera. Not if you find it in a thrift store, not if it calls to you, not if you hear that shutter click in the dark. I did. And now she's always watching me, waiting for her next victim. I tried to find answers after I moved, desperate to understand what I'd unleashed. I started digging into the history of that thrift store on Patton Avenue, searching online for anything that might explain the camera's origins. After hours of scrolling through local forums, I found a post from 5 years ago, a woman claiming she'd bought a Polaroid SX70 from the same store, only to start seeing a figure in her photos. A woman with red eyes who whispered her name at night. The woman said she'd tried to destroy the camera, but it kept coming back, appearing in her house no matter where she hid it. I kept searching, my stomach twisting as I found more stories, each one worse than the last. A man in 1998 claimed the camera had driven him to madness, saying the woman in the photos followed him everywhere, her red eyes appearing in every reflection until he couldn't take it anymore. Another post from 1975 mentioned a photographer who'd used the camera and vanished without a trace, leaving behind a stack of Polaroids showing the same woman with red eyes, her twisted smile growing wider in each frame. The last photo in the stack was blank, but the post claimed you could hear a faint scream if you held it to your ear. I don't know who she is, but I think she's tied to that camera. A spirit or demon trapped inside it, feeding on whoever uses it. I tried to bury the pieces of the camera in a field outside of town, but a month later, I found another photo. In my mailbox, this time of me standing in my new apartment in Charlotte, her red eyes closer than ever, her hand now resting on my shoulder. I burned that photo too, but I know it won't stop her. She's still out there, waiting for me, and I can't help but wonder if she's waiting for you too. So heed my warning. Never use that camera, no matter how cheap it is, no matter how much it calls to you. I did, and now she's always watching me, waiting for her next victim. Break the curse before it's too late. Subscribe to Awe Mysteries Beyond the Shadows now to ward off these haunting shadows, or they'll find you in the dark. Smash that like button to banish their grip. Ring the bell to keep them at bay and leave a comment. Tell us what you'd do if a cursed maid or camera came for you. Don't let their whispers claim you next.